Greetings, traveler of time. Perhaps the comfort surrounding you now allows you to forget the weight of your day, just as the cold night mist spreads across the small duchy of Astilia in the 8th century, wrapping the oak forest and the abbey of Saint-Félix-en-Plaine in its quiet veil. I'm merely an old historian, ready to whisper forgotten stories. If sleep finds you along the way, I'll be content. But tell me, from what corner of the world have you come to visit me? And while you're here, don't forget to like this story and subscribe to the channel. This European village, resting on the edge of twilight, breathes the damp scent of earth, freshly moistened by the afternoon drizzle, a fragrance that mingles with the slow smoke from hearths crackling in stone and clay. The air carries a gentle, steady chill that invites people to retreat indoors, to seek comfort not always found in the humble remedies of faith or in herbs gathered by chance. And under this soft cloak of dusk, an ancient secret begins to stir. In the deepening darkness of a monk's cell, Brother Thibaut, middle-aged, his face etched by long vigils, moves with silent precision, almost ritualistic. He isn't praying, but grinding with a small bronze pestle, a dark resinous paste whose sweet syrupy scent is unlike the familiar perfumes of myrrh or incense that usually linger in the abbey halls. The soft rhythmic thud of the pestle against the mortar is the only sound in the tiny room, a contrast to the wind beginning to whistle outside, making the few candles flicker. Thibaut, the monastery's apothecary and healer for the nearby lands, is preparing laudanum, the glorious remedy everyone knew came from the distant east. It's prized not only for easing the sharpest pains, but also for coaxing the body into deep, restorative sleep. Duke Emile, ruler of Astilia, lies in his oak bed high in the castle tower, tormented by a chronic pain in his leg, a wound from an old battle that never truly healed. The tapestries on the walls, the heavy bear pelt draped across him, none of it keeps the cold from seeping through the stone. What keeps him awake isn't the chill, but the dread of the next stab of pain. His physician, Master Alain, a learned man who studied in Salerno, brings a ceramic jar filled with Thibaut's dark, thick extract, meant to be mixed with warm wine and honey. It's a common practice of the time for opium, known in the West since antiquity, was traded mostly in its pure form before being transformed into potions and plasters by those who understood the deeper arts of alchemy or medicine, usually monks or court physicians. The drink has a velvety texture, its scent of spices and wine almost hides the sharp note of resin. The Duke feels it slide down his throat, spreading a comforting warmth. A sliver of moonlight passes through the narrow window, catching the golden dust in the air, and for the first time that night, his body loosens. The fear gives way to a soothing haze. Master Alain explains that the Arabs call the substance perfume, and that the knowledge of its cultivation and use reached Europe through trade routes and Muslim scholars, especially in Iberia and southern Italy. In the colder northern lands, its rarity only increased its value and mystique. Meanwhile, the abbey serves as a haven for peasants seeking relief from their suffering. Brother Thibaut guards his precious extract like a treasure, for poppy sap was uncommon in such cold regions. He recalls a day when a young carpenter, Etienne, brought his mother, Beatrice, an elderly woman weakened by a deep, relentless cough. Breathing had become a torment. The herbs and prayers had failed her. All that remained was her pain and his compassion. Bound by Christian duty to ease suffering whenever possible, Thibaut prepared a small dose, blending the opium with wild lettuce juice, another sedative known to ancient healers. He had learned the recipe from an illustrated parchment that once came from Constantinople. Beatrice, her hands trembling, her skin thin as rice paper, drank the small chalice with quiet resignation. Within minutes, her breathing softened. The rasp in her throat faded, and a silence, no longer the silence of pain but of granted rest, filled the little hut as she drifted into her first peaceful sleep in weeks. It was a kind of peace no earthly gift could match. That look of serenity on Beatrice's aged face stayed with Thibaut. It reflected a deeply held medieval belief that easing pain, not only curing it, was an act of divine mercy. Medicine then, guided by Galen and Hippocrates, saw opium as both a potent anodyne and a soporific, powerful but perilous, demanding care from those who used it. For Thibaut, each drop was a small miracle, a truce in the body's battle against illness and time. The risk of dependence was a price worth paying for comfort that faith alone could not provide. That night, while Duke Emile sank into drugged slumber and Beatrice rested at last, many across Astilia still endured fever, broken bones, or a lifetime of toil. The faint light of Thibaut's lantern glimmered across shelves of clay jars and wooden boxes, each one holding a secret of nature or of the healer's art. But none of the herbs from local fields held the same power as that dark, resinous paste. It bridged palace and cottage, noble and peasant, uniting the realm through shared fragility. With a small compass and a polished bone fragment, Thibaut measured the next portion for another patient, a young knight named Gautier, who had fallen hard from his horse during training. His pain was excruciating, his cries echoed through the infirmary. Only the promise of swift relief could quiet him. To Thibaut, pain was a demon to be driven out, and opium was his holy weapon, silent and merciful, granting the stillness needed for healing to begin. He often remembered tales told by southern merchants that opium reached Europe from Constantinople through Arab traders, though its roots lay far deeper in ancient Egypt, where it had been used for millennia in rituals and healing. That lineage, stretching across ages and faiths, gave the substance an almost sacred aura, a divine gift to ease human suffering. The thought that the same remedy had passed from pharaohs to monks comforted him. It was proof that knowledge, like mercy, could outlast empires. The scent of laudanum lingered in Thibaut's cell, a promise of quiet and rest, of momentary release from the burden of flesh. He knew he was offering more than medicine. He was granting a small, sweet oblivion, a pause that let body and soul recover. Such was the subtle art of monastic alchemy, turning life's bitterness into bearable stillness, a balm for the weary and the broken. He finished measuring the dose and hid the remaining paste behind an old volume of Pliny the Elder, where a precious parchment described Papaver somniferum and its properties. It was sacred knowledge, dangerous if misused, and he treated it with reverence. The line between cure and poison was thin as a prayer. Thibaut sighed, feeling the night's cold seep through the window. He covered the opium jar with linen, guarding its strength from moisture. At the castle, Duke Emile now felt the full weight of the potion. His pain dissolved into a gentle haze. The room felt warmer, the duties of rule far away. He thought he saw his father, the old duke, who too had relied on the same remedy in his final years. A bitter inheritance of power and pain, repeating as surely as the changing seasons. Master Alain assured him that his sleep would be deep and healing. The Duke nodded faintly, the feel of linen on his cheek fading into darkness. In the medieval world, the quest for relief was universal. Pain was constant, cures were few. Opium was not just a medicine, it was a privilege, a sign of status or divine favor. Its dark resin, carried along perilous routes wrapped in silk and spice, was both remedy and symbol, uniting faith, science, and desperation. Outside, the wind rose, and the darkness swallowed the abbey of Saint-Félix-en-Plain and the castle of Astilia alike, binding them under one vast, silent night. Exhausted, Brother Thibaut lit a new candle, its soft glow revealing a map pinned to the wall. His eyes lingered on a small mark over the Mediterranean, the route through which the precious extract traveled. He marveled at how far it came to bring comfort to the dying, a network of merchants, sailors, and monks unknowingly joined in the quiet labor of easing pain. Duke Emile slept, dreamless, painless, a rest worth more than gold, for peace of mind was the rarest treasure of all. And in Beatrice's cottage, the silence was just as deep, the same blessed stillness that promised a few hours of grace. The sweet, heavy scent of opium hung over Astelia like a gentle prayer, inviting all who breathed it to surrender, to let the harshness of the day fade away. In Thibaud's cell, the candlelight flickered softly, illuminating specks of dust that danced in the air. The only sound was his steady breath, slow and calm, a rhythm of meditation and rest. The healer himself seemed to draw peace from the very quiet he had created. A man of faith and reason, keeper of an ancient secret that promised gentle sleep, and as the abbey settled into silence, that peace stretched beyond its stone walls, wrapping the entire duchy in calm. Still within Brother Thibaud's cell, the night carries with it the faint echo of the morning prayers yet to come. But for now, there's only the deep quiet of midnight. The monk sits on his small wooden stool, feeling the rough fabric of his tunic against his skin as the candle burns slowly, casting long, fantastic shadows across the rows of jars on the shelf. He reflects on the delicate balance between healing and dependence that opium represents, a secret struggle shared by both church and medicine. Though it's a divine gift of relief, the lure of pleasure and total oblivion hangs over it, making the substance, for some, a dangerous escape from reality and repentance. The sweet scent of resin still lingers in the air, a constant reminder of that dual power, to save from pain, yet bind the soul within the fog of endless sleep. Thibaud recalls Father Hugo, an old priest from a neighboring abbey, who had come to rely almost daily on the substance to treat what he called spiritual melancholy, a deep sadness that kept him from his duties. The priest lived in a gentle haze, freed from the weight of the world, yet unable to feel true joy and faith, a small human tragedy revealing the darker side of the remedy. Thibaud knows that melancholy in the Middle Ages was seen as an imbalance of the humours, an excess of black bile treated with diets, bloodletting, and strong sedatives. He understands Hugo's need, but mourns the loss of his clarity and vigour. It's a historical truth that opium was used not only for physical pain, but also to calm emotional and mental unrest. Still, the Church preferred that endurance of suffering come through divine grace and penance. This subtle tension between earthly comfort and spiritual duty is what makes opium's place in that era so complex. At that same hour, far from the abbey and castle, in the small village of Verneuil, a market woman named Agnès, sturdy, cheerful, but plagued by terrible migraines, prepares her own humble remedy. She has no access to Brother Thibaud's refined laudanum, so she brews a weak infusion from wild poppies, though not of the potent somniferum kind. The sound of her heavy breathing fills the clay hut. The scent of dried herbs and peat smoke barely masks the vinegar she sniffs to ease the pressure in her head, a folk remedy more ritual than cure. She lies down on her straw mattress, the coarse texture beneath her back less troubling than the pulsing at her temples. The faint light of the oil lamp feels almost cruel to her eyes. The misery of the poor stood in stark contrast to the comfort of the noble, yet pain was their common thread. The difference lay only in the quality of relief. The peasants clung to weak homemade infusions, while the wealthy and the clergy could buy the certainty of oblivion that pure opium offered. This divide in access to healing is one of the quiet realities of the Middle Ages, especially when it came to rare and imported medicines. Back in his cell, Thibaud feels the chill of marble beneath his fingers as he washes the pestle, the coldness snapping him back to the practical duties of his role. He knows demand for his extract is high, and that desperation drives people to extremes. It forces him to guard each gram carefully. The fear that his formula might fall into the wrong hands or worse, be exploited for profit, weighs on him like another vow, one added to chastity and obedience. The abbey's stillness contrasts with the restless flow of the trade routes through which opium arrives, mostly via Genoa or Venice, those gateways to the eastern Mediterranean. At that time, the trade in rare spices and medicines was often controlled by Italian merchants, and before them by Jewish and Muslim traders, forming a web of knowledge and exchange that sustained Western medicine. It's an important historical truth. Europe's dependence on Mediterranean routes for exotic healing substances, opium, cinnamon, ginger, was absolute. Thibault rises and paces slowly around the cell, his bare footsteps nearly silent on the stone. The image of a monk guarding an ancient secret becomes poetic in that dim light. The comfort he brings to the sick is, in itself, a form of prayer, a wordless charity expressed through the quieting of pain. The Duke sleeps in his velvet bed, Beatrice rests in her humble cot, and Gautier, the wounded knight, finds a truce in the infirmary, all united by the same dark balm. The monk approaches his narrow window, the damp night air brushing his face. Beyond, the mist begins to lift, revealing the dark outlines of trees, a promise of dawn. He reflects on the nature of pain and sleep, two edges of human experience that meet, briefly reconciled, in the opium's touch. It soothes the flesh, but also grants the mind a pause, a moment of surrender, preparing it for acceptance and resignation. The silence is what Thibault values most. To him, stillness is the canvas on which the soul can repaint itself, free from the harsh colors of suffering. He returns to his work table, where a small, dark ceramic jar, brought from Sicily, rests beside the pestle. The faint scent of resin now seems gentler, almost inviting him to rest. He knows morning will bring new patience and new burdens, but for now, there is only the fragrance, the silence, and the peace he has orchestrated. A serenity built from ancient wisdom and rare substances. Brother Thibault touches the small wooden cross hanging from his neck, feeling the smooth, cool surface polished by years of prayer. He prays silently, for those under the medicine's spell and for those still awaiting its mercy. His prayer is not only for healing but for relief itself, for the simple grace of rest in a world ruled by toil and frailty. That is the quiet duty of both faith and science in the Middle Ages, to bring comfort where human hope falters. Meanwhile, far from the abbey, Duke Emile enjoys his first truly restorative sleep in weeks. Master Alain keeps watch by his side, satisfied with the remedy's power. He knows the Duke's life depends on his ability to manage pain, and opium is his most precious ally, worth more than any herbal tonic or poultice. The slow, steady rhythm of the Duke's breathing becomes a kind of melody, a soft victory over suffering. The promise of rest unites nobles and peasants, monks and laymen, all seeking the same brief truce from life's harshness. Opium, brought from distant lands, becomes an invisible thread, binding society in shared need and unequal privilege. The monk, the duke, and the market woman, all in their own way, cling to the same faint hope contained in that dark, fragrant resin. Thibault finally lies down on his wooden board, his thin straw mattress offering little comfort, but his mind is calm. The sense of duty fulfilled warms him from within. He understands that opium isn't the cure, it's the path to it. By calming the body, it lets nature begin its quiet work of repair. A poetic metaphor for the patience that life demands. He closes his eyes and surrenders to the rest the night allows, a soft contrast between the day's unrest and the peace of dawn. The final image is of the abbey wrapped in mist, a single faint light glowing in the apothecary's cell, a beacon of relief and hope in the vast darkness of the 8th century. This poetic invitation to sleep is the essence of what opium meant to that age. A pause, a temporary forgetting that renews the spirit for morning's return, a gift moving silently between stone walls and humble huts alike. The sweet resin scent lingers as a farewell, the last sense to fade before sleep takes hold. The abbey's serenity spreads outward, to the forest, to the castle, a calm born from ancient knowledge and the quiet power of a single flower. The chill in the air and the absence of sound invite the listener to join the monk in rest, leaving the weight of the hours behind just as the mist dissolves at dawn, an invisible passage into sleep. Opium, the drug of kings and the dying, keeps its promise of peace. Brother Thibaut, the last to keep vigil, finally drifts into slumber, and with him the entire duchy of Astilia seems to sink into a deep, protective silence. The image of the dark ceramic jar, filled with sweet resin, lingers in the mind, a symbol of comfort and mystery intertwined with the very essence of the medieval night, a final invitation to gentle forgetting. In this hour, relief is the only true currency, and the monk, unknowingly, becomes the bearer of a dream of peace for all. Such is the power of the poppy's extract, a secret that travels through time, reminding us of humanity's eternal search for rest amid pain. The contrast between the harshness of medieval life and the softness of opium's haze grants the substance its unique place in the history of medicine. Emile, Beatrice and Gautier, each in their own bed, sleep the deepest sleep the 8th century has to offer. The sun is still hidden, but the first shades of grey and pale pink are already slipping through the narrow gaps of the Abbey of Saint-Félix-en-Plaine, carried by the distant sound of the bell calling the brothers to the first hour. In this soft awakening, Brother Lucien, a novice in his early 20s, still with the roundness of youth in his face and eyes marked by natural curiosity, is sent to Brother Thibaut's cell to collect the opium tincture prepared for Sir Gauthier. The cold morning air is cut by the strong smell of bread baking in the kitchen, a warmth that mingles gently with the sweet trace of poppy extract that still lingers in the apothecary's workroom. The contrast sharpens the senses. Lucien steps inside with reverence, feeling the subtle change in temperature and the lightness in the air that always seems to surround Thibaut's space, a place he has long considered sacred because it exists to ease suffering. He notices the small ceramic jar, not the one holding the pure resin, but the one already mixed with wine and spices into laudanum, the calming elixir. He feels the cool, smooth surface of the vessel under his fingers as he picks it up. The jar seems to carry its own quiet authority, a secret of nature turned into medicine by a monk's hand. He remembers reading that the Greeks knew opium as the pharmakon nepenthes, a remedy for sorrow and forgetfulness. The young novice carries the jar carefully, sensing the weight of the dark liquid inside, and walks through the abbey corridors. His footsteps echo softly on the stone floor in the stillness of morning. His destination is the small infirmary, where Gauthier the knight has spent the night in near silent agony, letting out a low groan from time to time. Lucien can't help thinking about the mystery of it all, how a single plant can have such power over flesh and mind, how it can turn the sharpest pain into a warm haze and sleep. The thought both fascinates him and unsettles him, revealing the honest, questioning part of his nature. When he reaches the infirmary, he finds Gautier pale and sweating, biting his lower lip to hold back cries. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, straw, and bitter-smelling herbs. With the steady calm Thibaut taught him, Lucien slips a hand beneath the knight's head, feeling the heat of fever under his palm, and offers him a small wooden cup filled with the tincture. The knight drinks with desperate urgency. He feels the warmth of the wine, the sweet bitter resin sliding down his throat, and then, almost at once, a deep sigh escapes him. Within minutes, Gautier's body begins to loosen. The tightness in his jaw fades. The trembling in his muscles softens. His face, twisted by pain, settles into quiet. His eyes drift shut. Lucien watches the change and understands. This substance is, for many, the bridge between life and death. It offers a final mercy to the dying, a last rest to exhausted bodies. Historically, opium was commonly used in medieval infirmaries and monastic hospitals, not just to dull surgical pain, but to comfort the dying, to ease their passage in a way the Church considered both dignified and merciful. The novice rinses the cup, and the sweet scent of poppy lingers on his hands, not something he associates with pleasure, but with charity and with what feels like divine intervention in human suffering. As he steps back into the hallway, the abbey is slowly waking. He hears doors opening, quiet footsteps, low voices beginning the first prayers of the day. Lucien feels something almost holy in it. The way pain is hushed, the way life is held in suspension, the way the body is granted rest. He thinks of his grandmother, who suffered from a sickness of the stomach. In her final days, Brother Thibault had given her a little of that glorious remedy, allowing her to leave gently, without the convulsions and screams that had shaken her for months. To Lucien, opium is mercy made visible. It's where nature and knowledge, under the Church's blessing, meet not to deny death, but to soften it, a balance between accepting the end and refusing needless pain. When he returns to Thibault's cell, the monk is already awake, preparing a new portion of tincture. The steady rhythm of pestle against mortar fills the room again, a sound of patience, a sound of work done with care. In a low, even voice, Thibault explains that the dose for a young, strong knight must be higher than the dose for an old woman. Pain, he says, is a force that must be measured, and the remedy must be its equal weight. With the first light of dawn spreading across the work table, Thibault shows Lucien the small metal cups he uses for measuring. Each one is marked with a tiny, discreet symbol, indicating the exact quantity for a different kind of patient. One for the dying, one for the severely wounded, one for chronic pain. Precision, he says, is everything. Too much, and the sleep never ends. Too little, and the suffering drags on. This, he tells him, is the heart of a medieval apothecary's craft. The monk's expression turns serious as he shares something he once heard from a colleague who had studied at the School of Medicine in Salerno. Muslim physicians were already using opium to induce something like anesthesia in complex surgical procedures. This idea, unsettling and astonishing in equal measure, had begun in a small way to spread westward. Lucien listens with his mouth slightly open, imagining a surgeon working while the patient lies in an artificial, manufactured sleep. The smell of the extract, the steady knock of the pestle, the cool touch of worked metal in his hand, together they create an atmosphere of solemnity and discipline in the little cell, a sanctuary of healing and knowledge. Lucien begins to understand. Opium isn't just a remedy, it's a power, and power demands reverence, control, and silence. The way Thibault handles it, with care, humility, and exactness, teaches him its true cost. Thibault then places an old parchment in Lucien's hands. It's yellowed with age, thin and slightly rough to the touch. The text, written in simple Latin, describes the poppy plant and the method of extraction in careful detail. Tiny drawings in black and red ink trace each step. The monk explains that this parchment is the foundation of his work, and that passing down this knowledge is a sacred duty of the abbey, a small light of wisdom in an age thick with ignorance. Lucien studies the parchment. The symbols and drawings seem to rise off the page. He feels for the first time truly connected to a chain of learning that goes back generations. He understands that medicine in this time is not a single thing. It's prayer, superstition, observation, experiment, and opium sits at the meeting point of all of it. The bell rings again, calling the brothers to prime. With practiced care, Thibaud locks away the jar of pure resin under a bronze key, a quiet sign of custody and responsibility. Then he gives Lucien a tired but gentle smile, the kind worn by someone who carries a heavy secret for the sake of others. Lucien steps out of the cell and into the courtyard. The first touch of sunlight is turning the stone golden. The scent of damp earth mixes with the smell of warm bread. He feels the mild warmth of the air on his face. He walks with something more than a jar and more than instructions. He walks with the feeling of belonging to a living chain of mercy, a line stretching from ancient healers to Christian charity. The image of Sir Gautier asleep in peace, of Duke Émile lying in his induced rest, and of Agnès, the market woman, still fighting her pain. All of them stay with him, but now he sees them through a different lens, not just as sufferers, but as witnesses to something nearly miraculous. The poppy's gift. Opium is, to him, the substance that suspends a life in pain long enough for healing to begin, or, when healing is no longer possible, allows the end to arrive with grace. He walks toward the church. Voices in Greek and Latin are already rising and echoing under the vaulted stone. The calm of the abbey at this hour mirrors the calm that the extract offers the wounded and the dying. And in that moment the monastery feels like what it was always meant to be, a refuge for the body and for the soul. Daylight settles over Astilia, but in the abbey infirmary, Sir Gautier remains in his deep sleep, a suspension of pain so gentle it could be mistaken for death, though it's really the necessary state for healing to begin. The air is cool but mild, and beneath the heavy wool blanket, the knight's body radiates a soft warmth, a sign that the laudanum has eased both his fever and his restlessness. The scent of rosemary oil, used to rub his limbs, rises above the musty odor of straw and damp, a small effort by the monks to cleanse the air and offer comfort. After prime, Brother Lucien returns to the infirmary, this time with Brother Thibaud, who comes to check the knight's pulse and breathing. With the precision of years of practice, Thibaud presses his fingers to Gauthier's wrist, feeling the slow, steady rhythm. A faint smile touches his lips. The dose was perfect. He explains to Lucien that opium doesn't merely dull pain, it slows the heart and steadies the breath, protecting the body from collapse under suffering. Such knowledge, passed through observation and experience, was essential to the healer's art in medieval times. Thibaud then shares a cautionary tale of a young blacksmith's apprentice named Gervais, who once stole a vial of tincture from his master to treat a toothache. The boy took too much and fell into such a deep sleep that he was nearly buried alive, saved only by the monk's intuition. The story serves as a warning. Opium holds both life and death in its grasp, and only respect and knowledge can guide its use. Leaning over the sleeping knight, Thibaud murmurs that the potion's effects will last about 8 hours, a period of grace in which the body can heal, undisturbed by pain's assault. He places a hand on Gautier's arm and feels the rigid muscles beginning to relax. The transformation is visible. Pain gives way to calm, tension to stillness. The once labored breath now rises and falls softly, like the rhythm of a peaceful tide. Turning to Lucien, Thibaut begins to speak of trade. The opium they use, he explains, comes from Serbia or Macedonia, where Byzantine fields of poppies thrive. The trade routes pass through Venice, making the product costly and vulnerable to storms and wars. Scarcity drives its value higher, transforming the substance into a luxury, one that demands frugality and reverence in its use. Meanwhile, in the castle, Duke Emile awakens, feeling the absence of pain like a miracle. The chamber that had been a battlefield through the night is now calm, bathed in soft morning light filtering through the window. Dust motes shimmer like gold in the air. He lifts a hand to touch the bear pelt covering him, its warmth, its texture, and feels a full, enveloping comfort. It's a kind of luxury only opium can provide. Master Alain, standing nearby, prepares a cup of chamomile and honey, customary for rousing the Duke from the laudanum's effects. The gentle fragrance of the tea fills the room, coaxing wakefulness. When Alain asks about his sleep, Emile's roughened voice carries quiet gratitude. He describes it as a night without dreams, a kind of total forgetting he prizes more than victory on any battlefield. He rises slowly. His leg remains stiff, but the stabbing pain that haunted him is gone. The fleeting sense of recovery, temporary though it may be, contrasts beautifully with the weakness of his body. He knows the pain will return, but the laudanum has given him a reprieve, an interval of control that allows him to resume rule over his duchy with renewed energy. The Duke orders a small offering of silver coins to be sent to the abbey in thanks to Brother Thibaut, a token of gratitude that also reflects the quiet dependence between nobility and monastic knowledge, a bond woven throughout medieval society. In that age, the true value of opium was measured not just in weight or purity, but in the wisdom required to wield it. Back at the abbey, Thibaut speaks to Lucien about the poppy's symbolism. In antiquity, it was linked to both sleep and death, but the Church, he explains, redefined it as a sign of comfort and divine mercy in the face of suffering. It's a small example of how Christian tradition absorbed and transformed pagan meanings to serve a new spiritual purpose. Lucien asks about Agnès, the market woman with the terrible headaches. Thibaut sighs and admits that her access to the tincture must remain limited. To use it for chronic pain, however mild, could invite dependence and deplete the precious reserves meant for the dying and gravely injured. It's an ethical burden he carries daily, a balance between compassion and duty. In a quiet voice, Thibaut describes how opium feels within the body, a warmth that begins in the stomach and spreads to the limbs, loosening nerves and easing muscles. This, he says, is what most patients describe as the first true sign of relief. Lucien listens, trying to imagine it, understanding not just the science, but the experience of healing. They step outside to a small garden behind the abbey. There, among the herbs and roots, Thibaut tends a modest patch of wild poppies. Not somniferum, but a lesser kind he uses to make a gentle sedative tea for minor pains. The smell of damp soil rises, and the delicate red petals tremble in the morning breeze, a poetic contrast to the dark potency of the resin. Sunlight spills over the garden, and birdsong fills the air, the only sound, a melody of calm that mirrors the relief taking place inside the infirmary. In that light, Brother Thibaut looks less like a healer and more like a gardener of peace, cultivating nature to mend human suffering, a vision of serenity made flesh. He explains that poppies require secrecy and care in their cultivation. Their value tempts thieves and misuse alike. Even in crude form, the resin is coveted, a treasure of both medicine and temptation. Lucien feels in that moment that the abbey is more than a place of worship. It's a repository of knowledge and quiet power, a place where life and death, pain and relief meet under the same roof, governed by the same steady hands. That understanding stays with him. Before leaving for his other duties, Thibault visits the infirmary once more. Sir Gautier still sleeps soundly, his body utterly at rest. The sight is both unnerving and peaceful, a necessary stillness, a silent witness to the extract's power. As Thibault and Lucien walk away, the bell tolls again, calling the brothers to their day's work in the fields and scriptorium. Morning has fully arrived in Astilia. Duke Emile stirs in his castle, relieved and restored, while Sir Gautier dreams in his laudanum's sleep. The contrast between human frailty and the poppy's might closes this chapter. Opium, the gift that grants both kings and peasants a moment's escape from life's harshness, remains the great equalizer of the medieval world. The final image lingers, a dark ceramic jar, now empty, resting on Thibault's table, waiting to be filled once more with the miraculous tincture. It stands as a quiet symbol of the cycle of pain and relief that repeats each day in the Duchy of Astilia. The sun glows over the abbey, but the shadow of opium's mystery and its power still hovers gently in the light. Morning advances, carrying away the night's sharp chill, but inside the scriptorium of St. Félix-en-Plain Abbey, the silence is as thick as the mist that clings to its narrow windows. Brother Thibault, having traded his mortar for an inkwell, is now devoted to copying an ancient Arabic medical manuscript that describes the process of refining opium resin. The soft, rhythmic scratch of his goose quill across parchment is the only sound in the great hall, a quiet music of intellect and concentration, so at odds with the raw pain he had been easing only hours before. His pen moves steadily as he transcribes the method for making the incision on the poppy bulb, Papaver somniferum, noting that the cut must be made in the late afternoon, when the heat begins to fade, and that the milky sap should be gathered the next morning, after it has dried into the dark, potent resin. The text's slow, poetic cadence reflects the patience and precision required for such work. It is less a recipe than an art form, a ritual of observation and restraint. The monk breathes in the scent of gall ink and old parchment, a fragrance of knowledge itself, dry and faintly metallic. It fills the air around him like incense. He remembers a bit of history. The Romans once called the poppies mixed juice meconium, a term linked to sleep and stillness. Its medicinal use, he knows, reaches back thousands of years. Turning a page, he hears the low crackle of parchment beneath his fingers. The uneven texture of the material reminds him of the age of the wisdom he's preserving. He lingers on a passage explaining that, in proper doses, opium could stop severe diarrhea and quiet, relentless coughing, not only soothing pain, but addressing symptoms that in the Middle Ages could mean death. He knows its power is precisely what makes it dangerous. In excess, the same gift becomes poison. As he writes, the quill in his hand feels like an extension of his vow. To heal, to protect, to keep alive the knowledge that stands between suffering and peace. He looks up and sees Brother Anselm entering the room, coughing softly. The oldest monk in the abbey, Anselm is past 80, his frail frame bent by years of labor and cold. Thibault knows it won't be long before he must prepare a stronger dose of laudanum for him, not to cure, but to let him live his final years with dignity, free from the constant gnaw of pain. Watching the old man shuffle between the desks, his face a map of wrinkles, Thibault feels a renewed sense of purpose. For the elderly, whose days were often shaped by endurance rather than comfort, opium was a quiet blessing, a small mercy that turned pain into calm acceptance. To Thibault, each dose he gives is not an indulgence, but an act of compassion, The scent of beeswax, used to seal finished manuscripts, mingles with the faint trace of incense drifting in from the refectory. The mixture reminds him that learning, too, is a form of devotion. He feels an urge to expand his understanding of opium's uses, especially its transformation into poultices for localized pain, a method that lessened the sedative effect while keeping its healing touch. He focuses again on the text before him. One section calls opium the dissolver of all harmful humors and the pacifier of the restless spirit. The phrasing carries a philosophy beyond mere medicine, one that sees the body and soul as intertwined, each influencing the other. The notion comforts him. It aligns perfectly with his faith that healing is, at its core, both physical and spiritual. A quiet smile tugs at the corner of his mouth when he reaches a curious passage describing the cosmetic use of opium, mixed into ointments to soften the skin and smooth wrinkles. A reminder, almost humorous, that even in distant lands, people sought not only health, but beauty from the same mysterious flower. The abbey bell tolls again, announcing the midday meal. Thibaut carefully closes the parchment, feeling the soft grain of its leather cover beneath his fingers. A calm sense of fulfillment settles over him. He is the keeper of a secret that travels across centuries and continents, a bridge between Eastern wisdom and Western charity. He rises slowly, the stiffness in his back easing as he moves. The morning light spills through the misty windows, catching the ink's faint shimmer on his page. As he steps out of the scriptorium, he carries with him the image of the poppy, fragile, radiant, and perilous, and the quiet certainty that his work, though silent, sustains the peace of the Duchy of Astilia, from Duke Emile's tower to old Anselm's narrow bed. Brother Thibaut walks through the abbey's inner courtyard, feeling the cool morning air on his face and the gentle warmth of sunlight on his shoulders, a quiet contrast to the chill of stone and the heavy weight of the knowledge he carries. He makes his way to the refectory for the midday meal. The rich, comforting scent of lentil stew and rye bread fills the air, a fragrance of simplicity and sustenance that soothes him after hours of intellectual labor. He sits among the other monks, listening to the soft murmur of the prayer of thanks before eating. The sight of the humble meal, a clay bowl and a wooden spoon, strikes him as a vivid counterpoint to the luxury and cost of the laudanum he prepares. It reminds him that in the cloistered life, relief from pain is the only permitted luxury, and one to be shared sparingly. As he eats, Thibaut recalls a conversation with Duke Emile's physician, Master Alain, about the growing trade in falsified opium and weak poppy substitutes sold by wandering healers. It was a common deceit, born of scarcity and greed, and their discussion underscored how valuable and easily corrupted the substance could be. The purity of the abbey's extract was therefore its greatest strength, its effectiveness a matter of both faith and reputation. Beside him sits Brother Gaston, a broad-shouldered young monk who tends the abbey's garden. In a low voice, careful not to disturb the silence, Gaston tells him about the harvest of wild poppy bulbs, the sticky sap that clings to the skin, the rough scent of soil and resin that lingers on his hands. His words paint a tangible picture of the humble origins of the substance that later becomes such a powerful medicine. Thibaut leans closer and explains quietly that the true Papaver somniferum yields a much stronger sap, and that only a trained eye can distinguish it from lesser wild strains. It's a brief lesson in botany, but also a reminder. Mastery of nature and its hidden properties is a rare and guarded art. He chews the coarse rye bread slowly, tasting the grain's earthiness, and thinks of Duke Emile, likely awake now, free from pain, and of how that comfort allows him to rule with a calmer mind and steadier judgment. In a sense, Thibaut muses, Opium is a political remedy as much as a medical one. It steadies the heart of the ruler and thus the peace of the realm. After the meal, he steps back into the courtyard to breathe in the fresh air. The sound of birdsong and the gentle trickle of water from the fountain create an atmosphere of serenity, a fragile stillness that he draws into himself before returning to his work. The monastic life is a refuge from the world's clamor, yet also an active center of healing and knowledge. The sun warms his face, the air soft and golden. He thinks of Beatrice, the carpenter's mother, now likely resting peacefully without the torment of coughing. A quiet blessing from the abbey. Opium not only eases pain, he reflects, but rekindles hope in those who have forgotten it. He recalls reading that the Arab physicians of Al-Andalus were among the first to refine opiates, developing purification techniques to lessen side effects, a genuine historical truth that reveals the depth of Islamic influence on European medicine. The exchange of wisdom across cultures, he knows, is the hidden lifeblood of healing. Across the courtyard, Brother Lucien is carrying bundles of firewood to the kitchen, his youthful energy a living contrast to the fragility of those confined to the infirmary. In that contrast, Thibaut perceives a kind of balance, opium as the equalizer, lending the weak a brief taste of strength through rest. He pauses by the old stone well, brushing his fingers along the rough, moss-covered edge. The cool texture grounds him in the present moment. He reflects on the transience of life and the role of his craft in softening its passage. Gratitude wells up in him for the gift of knowledge that can ease suffering, a divine trust to be used sparingly and with reverence. He recalls hearing that Venetian merchants carried the resin in small lead caskets to protect it from moisture and rats, a vivid image that reminds him of its worth and fragility on the long, perilous journey to the west. Refreshed in spirit and body, Thibaut returns to his duties. He re-enters the scriptorium, where the cool air smells faintly of ink and vellum. Taking up his quill, he resumes copying the ancient text, the gentle rasp of the pen against the parchment filling the still room. He lingers on a passage describing the faint pleasure opium can bring, a temptation of the flesh that must be ignored. To him, this is more than a warning. It's a spiritual test. For the monk, the extract is not a source of indulgence, but a measure of virtue, a reminder that every healer must master himself before he can master pain. Outside, the wind sighs softly against the windows, making them hum with a low, steady vibration. It's the only sound breaking the silence, a whisper of the world beyond the walls. Within that quiet, Thibaut works calmly, his heart steady, his purpose clear. His thoughts are filled with a tranquil sense of duty. Between pain and peace, he stands as the bridge, humble, devoted, and vigilant. In this quiet century, Brother Thibaut is not merely a monk or a healer. He is the guardian of serenity itself. Afternoon settles over the Duchy of Astilia, and with it comes a subtle shift in the air. The damp chill of morning has given way to a dry, dusty warmth, stirred by the creak of wagon wheels and the calls of merchants gathering for the weekly fair in the village of Verneuil. Brother Lucien has been assigned to accompany a small group of peasants delivering provisions, and, more importantly, to bring a small dose of laudanum to the market woman Agnès, whose migraines have grown so severe they've left her nearly paralyzed. The transition from the abbey's stillness to the noise and motion of the fair feels overwhelming, a shock of sound, smell, and color. Leaving behind the cool stone walls, Lucien feels the afternoon sun warm the back of his neck. The air smells of manure and hay, of freshly cut wood, a raw perfume of rural life, so unlike the incense and tinctures of the abbey. He walks beside Jacques, a broad-shouldered farmer with sunburnt skin, who tells him of Agnès's agony, describing it as hammers in her skull without end. The words paint the pain vividly enough that Lucien can almost feel it. Holding the small clay vial of dark liquid, the novice becomes aware of its weight, how much trust and how much danger a few spoonfuls can hold. He knows the dose is small, enough to dull the pain and allow a few hours of rest, not the deep suspended sleep of the night Gauthier. Among the poor, pain is constant and relief is rare. Nobles might suffer grandly, but peasants endure endlessly. When they reach the outskirts of the village, the sensory assault intensifies. The sharp clang of the blacksmith's hammer on iron, the cries of merchants shouting their prices, the heavy aroma of roasting meat and pungent cheese. To Lucien, used to the abbey's near-sacred quiet, it all feels dizzying. He notices the houses, rough wooden frames filled with clay and straw, their roofs thatched or tiled with uneven clay. He remembers something he once read. In the 8th century, few villages had paved streets or sewage systems. Mud, filth, and stagnant water were part of daily life, and with them, sickness. No wonder remedies like opium were so prized. As they approach Agnès's stall, the air changes again. The scent of saffron and spices gives way to the sharp bite of vinegar, which her husband Gervais uses in vain to relieve her pain. Lucien feels a pang of sympathy. He's seen that same helplessness in others, the futility of home remedies against the crushing force of pain. Gervais greets him with tired, anxious eyes. His small frame and calloused hands speak of years of hard work and quiet worry. He leads Lucien behind the stall, where Agnès lies on a pile of grain sacks, her face pale and drawn, her hands pressed tightly to her temples. The low moan that escapes her lips tells more than words could. With steady, deliberate movements, Lucien prepares the dose, mixing the dark tincture into a cup of warm water sweetened with honey. He explains gently, his voice calm and sure, that the medicine won't cure her, but it will silence the pain for a while, giving her body a chance to rest. His tone alone seems to soothe Gervais, who listens as if to a prayer. Agnès drinks slowly, grimacing at the bittersweet taste. Within minutes, warmth begins to spread from her stomach up to her temples, a gentle wave that melts the tension from her face. Her clenched hands loosen, her breathing deepens. The pain ebbs. Lucien and Gervais sit in silence, listening to the muffled noise of the market outside, now distant and soft, as if the whole world has quieted to match her peace. Lucien studies her resting face and realizes something profound. Opium isn't just medicine for the rich or the dying. It's a form of mercy, an act of grace that bridges the chasm between privilege and poverty. In the stillness of that moment, he sees that compassion, too, can be measured in drops. He runs his fingers absently over the rough canvas of the stall, feeling its coarse texture, the same simplicity that defines Agnès's life. She owns little, has no doctors or silks, no fine bed to rest upon, and yet, in this hour, she shares the same reprieve as Duke Émile, the soft forgetting granted by the poppy. It is, he thinks, a strange kind of equality, the only kind their world allows. When Agnès finally drifts into sleep, her face serene, Lucien feels a quiet satisfaction. His task is complete. He leaves the stall with the image of her resting form imprinted in his mind, a reminder that even brief relief is a victory. He rejoins Jacques, and together they head back toward the abbey. The sounds of the market fade behind them. The chatter, the clanging, the bleating of goats, replaced once more by the silence of open fields. The air cools as the sun sinks low, tinting the sky in shades of orange and violet. Dust rises beneath their feet, and a faint chill settles in. By the time the abbey's towers come into view, Lucien feels as though he has crossed two worlds, one noisy, raw, and restless, the other still, measured, and merciful. The fair continues behind him, but its noise seems far away now, swallowed by the evening wind. In the end, he thinks, suffering is universal, but in the harsh fabric of medieval life, relief is a rare privilege, and today he has carried that privilege, carefully sealed in clay, from the quiet halls of the abbey to a woman's weary hands. As the first stars appear, the novice walks in silence, the vial now empty, but his heart full, with the calm certainty that mercy, like light, must always be carried outward from the places that hold it. The journey back to Saint-Félix-en-Plaine unfolds in quiet reflection. As the cart creaks along the dirt road, the sound of its wheels grinding against the earth becomes the rhythm of the evening, a soft, steady pulse beneath the darkening sky. Brother Lucian feels the air cooling against his skin, a gentle chill that makes him pull his sleeve down over his arm. The warmth and chaos of the village fade behind him, replaced by the stillness of open fields and the scent of tilled soil at dusk. He thinks of Agnès and the fleeting mercy the laudanum granted her. He realizes that Brother Thibault's work is not about conquering pain, but buying time against it, purchasing a few hours of peace where nature offers none. Between remedy and ruin, it is precision alone that draws the line. This thought deepens his reverence for the ancient scrolls and the exacting art of dosage, the fragile balance between hope and inevitability. Jacques, the farmer walking beside him, breaks the silence to share a village custom. In his hamlet, he says, when someone is dying in pain, families place a wild poppy blossom beneath the pillow of the sufferer, not for healing, but as a gesture of faith, a charm against despair. The story, told in the fading light, touches Lucian. Even without the abbey's extract, the flower itself carries meaning. It is proof that people will always seek comfort, even in symbols. As night thickens, Lucian lifts his eyes to the horizon. The first star flickers into view, steady and remote, a reminder of the order that governs the heavens. Humanity, he thinks, suffers in chaos, but the cosmos remains composed. In the medieval mind, medicine itself is an attempt to restore that order, to realign the body's humours, the spirit's imbalance, the world's disharmony. The abbey's stone walls soon appear ahead, rising from the landscape like a fortress of knowledge and faith. Their solidity stands in contrast to the fragile wooden huts of Verneuil. He recalls what Thibault once said, that abbeys like Saint-Félix were sanctuaries not only for the soul, but also for learning and for the preservation of precious remedies like opium. Behind those thick walls, both the sacred and the scientific are kept safe from the decay of ignorance and time. The scent of wood smoke greets them before the gates. It's the smell of refuge, of hearth and bread, of peace reclaimed. Lucian feels the tension of the day release from his body. The noise and colour of the market dissolve into memory, replaced by the calm rhythm of monastic life. Agnès' face, resting at last, lingers in his thoughts, a quiet echo of compassion fulfilled. Jacques, before parting, thanks him with simple words. "Pain," he says, "is worse than hunger. You can endure an empty stomach, but not an aching body." The truth of it sinks deep. In a world where suffering is constant, opium is more than medicine. It is mercy made tangible. When Lucian passes through the abbey gate, the sound of the heavy wooden doors closing behind him marks his return to seclusion. The courtyard air is cool, still, and perfectly silent. The serenity feels almost holy. He goes straight to Brother Thibault's cell and finds the monk reading by the dim flame of an oil lamp. The faint rustle of parchment is like a prayer. Thibault listens to his account quietly, nodding as Lucian tells him the dose worked. Then in his calm, grave voice, he reminds the novice, True charity is not only to give the remedy, but to give the rest that follows, to return a soul to hope. Thibaut shows him an old illustration of the poppy, painted in soft reds and greens with natural pigments. Lucien runs his fingertips over the parchment, feeling the fine texture. The image once served as a lesson for young monks learning to identify the sacred plant, a relic of the abbey's careful teaching. The monk then describes the scent of the resin when harvested in sunlight, a heavy, honeyed fragrance that signals its strength. The detail draws the circle closed. From the field to the vial, from agony to quiet, the flower's essence binds them all. Lucien leaves the cell with a tranquil heart. Outside, the night has deepened completely over Astilia. The silence is absolute, broken only by the distant call of an owl. Somewhere in the castle, the Duke sleeps in relief. Somewhere in Verneuil, Agnes breathes peacefully. Across the duchy, the same dark bloom has done its work. The opium, the drug of peace, has fulfilled its vow, linking the noble and the poor beneath one shared blessing, the brief, merciful forgetfulness of pain. Morning unfolds gently over the Abbey of Saint-Félix-en-Plaine, revealing a quieter rhythm in Brother Thibaut's day. A focus on the intimate ritual of refilling the small clay jar that Master Alain, Duke Émile's physician, will soon collect. Inside his narrow cell, the monk performs the task with the same devotion he brings to prayer. His movements are deliberate, almost ceremonial, as he weighs the dark resin on a pondus, a delicate bronze balance with tiny engraved counterweights, an instrument as rare as it is precious. He knows the Duke's comfort, perhaps even his life, depends on the accuracy of this moment. With steady hands, Thibaut uses a polished bone spatula to scrape the poppy resin, feeling the faint stickiness under the blade. The air fills with its dense, honey-sweet scent, a fragrance that long ago lost its exotic charm for him, replaced by the familiar gravity of duty. The slow, careful handling of the opium has become almost an act of meditation, the monk's quiet communion with the substance that binds him to both suffering and salvation. As he works, he recalls an authentic account from the court of Charlemagne, where fortified wines infused with plant extracts, including poppy, were used to soothe the chronic aches left by endless campaigns. Among nobles, such elixirs were not hidden vices, but badges of privilege, proof of access to the costly remedies that only Eastern trade could supply. Thibaut's thoughts drift to the contrast between two forms of pain, the Duke's, constant but tended, and Agnès's, raw and episodic, eased only in moments of desperation. Managed pain versus endured pain. The difference is as much about wealth as about medicine. In this, the monk sees reflected the social hierarchies of their world, where the path to relief is paved with coin. He places the tiny bronze weights on the balance, watching them tip and sway until equilibrium settles. The metal is cool beneath his fingers, its dull gleam catching the morning light. Each weight is a measure of mercy, each fraction of a gram, a calculated portion of oblivion destined for a nobleman's veins. The precision of the act reminds him that his vocation is not only to pray, but to intervene, to translate faith into care. He remembers reading that traders once carried raw opium in silk pouches to protect it from moisture and decay, treating it with reverence equal to that of a relic. His clay jar, humbler and rougher, lacks such elegance, yet the resin within receives the same respect. He pours the thick extract with care, sealing the vessel with beeswax. The soft hiss of the melted wax falling onto the lid is the last sound in the small chamber, a quiet punctuation to his morning rite. When he straightens, a faint crack in his own joints reminds him that the healer, too, is mortal. The echo of his body's frailty stirs empathy, a kinship with every soul who comes seeking relief. He places the sealed jar in a small linen pouch and sets it by the door, ready for Master Alain's arrival. The exchange will be wordless, as always, but deeply symbolic, a bridge of trust between the contemplative silence of the abbey and the restless needs of the court. Stepping to the window, Thibaut feels the morning sunlight touch his face. The courtyard below glows with warmth, the golden light softening the grey of the stone walls. In that quiet contrast, the brightness over the cold rock, he sees the essence of his work, the fragile promise of hope shining against the endurance of pain. By mid-morning, the rhythmic stillness of the abbey is broken by the sound of hooves on stone. The echo of iron against the courtyard announces the arrival of Master Alain, Duke Emile's physician, who has come for his customary visit to collect the royal remedy. Alain, an austere man with sharp features and careful movements, wears fine wool garments and carries a small leather satchel, the vessel that will hold the abbey's most precious export. He dismounts with restrained haste, the soft thud of his boots on the cobbled courtyard signaling both urgency and decorum. Brother Lucien greets him at the gate and leads him through the echoing halls to Brother Thibaut's cell, where the monk waits beside a sealed clay jar. Their handshake, firm, brief, and wordless, is a quiet exchange of respect, a mutual acknowledgement of the power contained in that small vessel. For both men, opium is more than a medicine. It is a shared language between science and faith. Master Alain remarks with satisfaction on the Duke's dreamless sleep, a rest so profound it seems to border on grace. The calm it brought, he says, is owed entirely to the abbey's purity of craft and the precision of Thibaut's dosage. The monk listens, head slightly bowed, accepting the praise not as flattery, but as confirmation of divine order in his work. As they speak, Thibaut mentions a historical note he once copied from an ancient text, how the Greek physician Galen, whose writings underpin all medieval medicine, often prescribed opium for ailments ranging from headaches to melancholy, calling it one of nature's noble remedies. Its long lineage, he muses, legitimizes their continued reliance on it, sanctifying the act of easing pain. He passes the sealed jar across the table. Alain inspects it closely, running his fingertips over the cool, smooth clay, then pressing gently at the golden wax seal to confirm its integrity. Satisfied, he tucks the vessel into his satchel, the gesture both practical and reverent. Within the ducal court, opium is a currency more precious than gold, a medicine that buys stability, lucidity, and control. The physician explains that the Duke, now rested, has resumed his duties with renewed calm, and that his relief has had a ripple effect throughout the palace. Decisions made more patiently, tempers cooled, order restored. The observation pleases Thibaut. In this light, the monk reflects the medicine serves not only the body, but the realm itself. Pain subdued becomes peace sustained. Thibaut inquires about Agnès, the market woman. Alain's reply is brisk, almost dismissive. The suffering of commoners, he says, is part of life, best met with prayer and endurance. The abbey's tincture, he insists, must be preserved for greater needs, the duke, soldiers, the gravely ill. The monk nods, though inwardly he feels the weight of the divide between the charity of the cloister and the cold pragmatism of the court. The scents in the room mark the meeting of two worlds. The faint musk of leather and horse that clings to Alain's cloak mingles with the wax, parchment, and ink that define Thibaut's world. The contrast is almost symbolic. The noise and urgency of worldly duty against the silence of faith. Yet the monk remains serene. To him, every pain, noble or peasant, is sacred, deserving of the same quiet mercy. He recalls a traveller's tale he once heard. In faraway lands, opium is grown in hidden gardens, guarded by families who pass down its secrets through generations, their knowledge as closely protected as a royal treasure. The story adds to the substance's mystique, its dual identity as both medicine and myth. When the exchange is done, Alain bows slightly and takes his leave. Soon the sound of hooves fades beyond the gate, and the abbey reclaims its silence. Thibault stands for a moment in the doorway, feeling the still air settle again like a cloak around his shoulders. Then he turns back to his work. He returns to his bronze scale, the cool weight of the metal steady beneath his fingers, and begins preparing another, smaller dose, this one for Père Renaud, an old villager dying of a relentless cough. The act is the same, though the ritual differs. No wax seal this time, only a scrap of linen tied with twine. The gesture, humble yet deliberate, mirrors the recipient's life, unadorned but no less deserving of comfort. In these quiet repetitions, Thibault feels his purpose affirmed. His craft, precise and compassionate, bridges the distance between heaven's mercy and the body's despair. Each jar, each measure of resin is a prayer given form, a weight of pity made tangible. As he finishes, sunlight floods the cell, spilling gold across the stone walls. The warmth soothes his hands as he sits to rest, eyes half closed. In his mind, two images converge: the Duke in his silken bed, wrapped in the peace of luxury, and the peasant Renaud, awaiting release upon his straw pallet. Between them, there is no difference that matters. Pain is universal, and so too must be the kindness that answers it. Late afternoon settles over the Duchy of Astilia, drawing the focus of the story outward, from the quiet intimacy of the abbey to its place within the vast web of medieval trade and faith. Brother Lucian has been tasked with cataloguing the abbey's supply ledgers, and as he turns the brittle pages of a thick volume bound in pigskin, the faint rustle of parchment fills the library, a sound of order, record, and continuity. One entry captures his attention: the most recent purchase of pure opium. The neat Latin script names the supplier, Pietro di Forli, a Genoese merchant who had sailed from the island of Cyprus, one of the era's known centers of poppy cultivation. The transaction is recorded in solidi of gold, the sum staggeringly high. Lucian runs his fingers over the uneven parchment where the figures are inscribed, feeling both the grain of the page and, imaginatively, the cold weight of the coins that had changed hands. The note alone speaks to the resin's value and to its strategic importance within the abbey's modest walls. Reading further, Lucian discovers a fascinating detail about the transport itself. For safety, the shipments travelled under official Venetian protection and were often declared in customs ledgers as balsamum sacrum, holy balm, or remedy of the passion. The subterfuge served a practical purpose. Bandits, wary of anything labelled as belonging to the church, would leave the cargo untouched. The detail lends the substance an air of sanctity, blurring the line between sacred and pragmatic, faith and trade. As he pauses over the entry, Lucian reflects on the contrast between the luxury and danger of such commerce and the humble stillness of Brother Thibault's cell, where that costly resin becomes the quiet balm of human mercy. From the ducal tower to the market square, the relief granted by a few drops of laudanum depends on a sprawling network of sailors, scribes, merchants and monks, a vast, invisible web linking pain and compassion across continents. Another note records that part of the resin was used to prepare a special incense for the Mass of the sick, mixed with myrrh and storax, its sweet, heavy smoke believed to offer comfort to the spirit and invite divine rest. In that ritual, the power of the poppy rose heavenward, transforming from medicine for the body into solace for the soul. Leaning over the solid oak table, Lucian feels the faint warmth of the polished wood beneath his palms. The ledger's pages reveal not only trade, but humanity. Pietro di Forlì, the Genoese merchant, had requested a discount in exchange for a promise that the abbey would pray for his ailing son. The deal, then, was more than economic. It was an exchange of earthly cure for spiritual intercession, binding commerce and faith into a single act of hope. Further entries surprise him still. The abbey, it seems, did not merely buy opium, but resold small portions of its surplus to neighboring monasteries, quietly functioning as a regional center of healing. In this way, Saint-Félix-en-Plaine became not just a house of prayer, but a node of influence, a distributor of relief, its reputation spreading across the duchy like the fragrance of its sacred incense. Lucien traces the elegant lettering of the records, the ink now faded to a reddish brown. He realizes that opium, beyond its medicinal power, underpins the abbey's survival and standing. It is both remedy and resource, a substance that sustains charity even as it enhances authority, a delicate balance between mercy and necessity. At the margin of one page, he finds a small drawing, a poppy rendered as a chalice, its petals labeled Calix Quietudinis, the cup of stillness. The phrase lingers in his mind, a poetic distillation of the plant's dual nature, poison or peace, depending on the hand that measures it. In that moment, Lucien understands that Brother Thibault's true gift is not in growing the flower, but in discerning its measure, distributing its power with wisdom and restraint. Outside, the bell tolls for vespers, its deep tone vibrating through the stone halls. Lucien closes the ledger gently, feeling the weight of history in his hands. As he extinguishes the small oil lamp, the library returns to shadow. The knowledge he's uncovered hums quietly within him, a revelation that pain, faith, and commerce are threads of the same tapestry, woven together by the timeless human search for relief. Lucien leaves the library and steps into the cloister, where the evening air is turning cooler, brushing against his skin like a whisper from the approaching night. The warmth of the afternoon sun still lingers faintly on the stone, but the chill seeps in from the edges of the garden. His footsteps sink softly into the damp grass, the muffled rhythm his only companion in the hush between day and dusk. His mind lingers on the intricate web that connects their secluded abbey to the Genoese merchant Pietro di Forlì and to the distant poppy fields of the Mediterranean, a reminder that even in this quiet corner of Christendom, healing is a global, costly endeavor. He reflects on the spiritual dimension of that commerce. Opium, carried under the guise of balsamum sacrum, holy balm, was more than a mere commodity. It was treated as a divine instrument against suffering. In a world where faith and trade walked hand in hand, devotion itself became a kind of protection, a sacred disguise for worldly goods, too precious to risk to thieves or chance. When Lucien enters the church, he is met by the thick, familiar scent of incense and beeswax, sweet and steady. He imagines the special incense prepared with traces of opium, the faint narcotic undertone drifting through the air during a mass for the sick, its fragrance calming the coughs and restlessness of the frail. The idea strikes him as beautiful, a communal use of the poppy's grace, a mercy shared through prayer and breath. He joins the choir stalls as the monks begin their chant. The Latin verses rise and fall in perfect rhythm, the sound of faith expressed through repetition. The harmony fills the vaulted space, washing away all thought of the noisy market of Verneuil or the perilous seas that bring their medicine north. For the monks, peace comes through ritual and constancy, just as for the sick, it comes through the measured dose of the resin. As he sings, Lucien recalls Pietro's story, the merchant who traded gold for prayers, and understands something deeper. In this age, relief and salvation are the two true currencies, and opium stands at their intersection, a mediator between earthly life and promised rest. After Vespers, Brother Thibaut beckons him into the sacristy. The elder monk is putting away the sacred oils and chalices, the flicker of a single candle catching in the polished silver. The air is thick with the scent of wine and incense, sharp and heady. Thibaut's tone is low but deliberate as he warns Lucien about the abbey's store of opium. Its worth, he says, lies not only in its rarity, but in the danger it holds, the temptation it can awaken. This remedy, he tells him, must remain a secret of mercy, not an object of desire. He pauses, then shares a somber tale. Long ago, a monk of their own house succumbed to that temptation, taking the drug to dull the austerity of fasting and solitude. What began as relief ended in ruin, an unending stupor that left him cut off from prayer and duty. It was a quiet tragedy, one that branded the abbey's memory. The poppy's gift, Thibaut says, is also its curse. The line between healing and bondage is as thin as the edge of a blade. The monk rests his palm on a reliquary of polished brass, its surface cold and smooth, and compares its sanctity to the jar he keeps hidden in his cell. Both are vessels of faith and protection, one for the soul, the other for the suffering flesh. Lucien inhales deeply. The mingled scents of wine and incense here differ sharply from the sweet, heavy aroma of the resin in Thibaut's workshop. He senses the duality. Faith soothes the spirit, opium the body. The two together form the full measure of compassion that defines their vocation. Thibaut then urges him to continue his studies in the trade ledgers. To understand the source, he says, is to understand the burden. Knowledge is not power, it is humility before creation. The words settle in Lucien's mind like a benediction. Finally, the monk smiles, a calm, knowing smile that softens his lined face. In the end, he says, the poppy is a gift of nature shaped by human wisdom for the glory of God and the relief of his creatures. Remember that, Lucien. Our abbey exists not only to pray, but to heal. When Lucien steps back into the corridor, the candlelight behind him fades, and the chill of evening deepens. He feels the weight of what he has learned, not as a burden, but as belonging. The secret he now shares is ancient, dangerous, and holy, the knowledge of how mercy can take form in a single drop of darkness. Afternoon drifts gently over the Duchy of Astelia, and a hush settles like a soft veil over fields and cloisters alike. The abbey's rhythm slows with the fading light, the peace of prayer seeping outward into the countryside. Brother Lucien lingers alone in the small herb garden, trimming mint and wormwood, his hands perfumed by their sharp green scent. The crisp fragrance clears the heavy sweetness of opium from his mind. Sunlight strikes the garden at an oblique angle, stretching the shadows long across the soil. The air feels mild, balanced between warmth and coolness, a quiet hour suspended between labor and rest. He kneels in the earth, feeling the moist, cool texture beneath his knees, and reflects on the nature of healing. The poppy, powerful, foreign, and costly, offers one kind of relief. These humble herbs of the abbey provide another, gentler comfort, accessible to all. In that contrast lies a truth of medieval medicine. A healer's wisdom depends not only on rare imports, but on an intimate knowledge of the local and the ordinary, blending the exotic with the familiar to restore the body and perhaps the spirit. Nearby, a shallow stone basin holds still water where bees come to drink. Lucien watches their delicate movements and sees in the mirrored surface a quiet metaphor for the poppy's gift, a tranquil stillness that calms the inner storm of pain. He recalls the serene faces of Agnès, the market woman, and the knight Gautier, each surrendered to a peace born of Chibaud's careful tincture. From the bell tower, a low, steady toll marks the passing hour. Its sound mingles with the faint hum of the bees, both rhythmic and unhurried. Lucien finds himself wrapped in contemplation, his thoughts circling the mystery of suffering and its relief. Pain, he realizes, is woven into the fabric of existence, but comfort, whether born of faith or medicine, must be cultivated with intention, like the herbs beneath his hands. He remembers one of Thibault's stories, of a traveller from the East who told how, in his homeland, labourers used diluted opium not for agony but for exhaustion, a mild reprieve from toil. The tale had troubled Thibault, who called it a misuse of the glorious remedy, meant not for pleasure but for mercy. The story lingers with Lucien, a quiet reminder that even healing can stray toward temptation. He resumes his pruning, savouring the simple clarity of the task. The soft snap of each stem, the brush of leaves against his fingers, restores a sense of purity to his work. The sage, with its silvery texture and gentle fragrance, will later be dried for teas that ease digestion. A humble medicine, but one with its own quiet dignity. Every plant, he thinks, carries its purpose and measure of strength. Together, they form the language of care. Lucien's thoughts wander to Brother Thibault, perhaps now in his cell, studying the properties of resins or preparing another careful dose. The monk's dedication humbles him. In this world, a healer is not merely a servant of bodies, but a steward of time, prolonging labor, rest, and the fragile balance of life within the community. As the sun lowers, its light softens into gold, and the garden exhales a richer perfume, mint, sage, soil, and dusk mingling into one serene breath. Lucien feels a peace spreading through him, a stillness both physical and spiritual. The abbey, with its quiet walls and ordered gardens, seems to pulse with that same calm, a sanctuary of rest in a restless world where both body and soul are invited, gently, to breathe. Still in the garden, Lucien tends to a small patch of chamomile, the gentle trickle of water from his jug falling onto the soil like a lullaby. The sound itself feels like healing, soft, steady, unhurried. As he watches the earth darken with moisture, he reflects on the difference between opium, which grants an artificial sleep and silences pain, and chamomile, whose warmth brings a natural calm and quiet rest. The contrast feels almost poetic, the powerful intervention versus the humble comfort. The air fills with the faint, honeyed scent of the blossoms, a fragrance of innocence that stands in gentle opposition to the heavy, complex aroma of the resin. He recalls a passage he once read in a codex of Saint Jerome, where the saint warned against excess in all things, even in medicine, urging restraint so that the soul would not grow sluggish or numb. The teaching lingers as a moral echo, a reminder that though the Church allowed the easing of pain, it distrusted the surrender of consciousness. It was an old dilemma, to heal without erasing awareness, to comfort without dulling the spirit. Rising, Lucien walks between the rows of herbs. The air beneath the trees is cooler, carrying the faint chill of approaching dusk. His hand brushes the rough bark of an old oak, its surface scarred and solid. He thinks of the endurance of pain across the ages, how it too has roots that run deep, and of humanity's endless struggle to find relief. The silence around him feels vast now, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves stirred by the wind, a sound that seems to breathe serenity itself. Beyond the garden wall, he notices a peasant boy, Garçon, one of the abbey's tenants. The child's back is already bent from work far too heavy for his small frame. Lucien watches him gather wild blackberries into a woven basket, the gesture steady and instinctive. The sight becomes for him a living symbol of medieval life, where hardship begins in youth and physical pain is as constant as the seasons. In that moment, he understands more deeply why the Abbey's opium is precious beyond gold. It offers, if only for an hour, a truce with existence. He reflects on how difficult and costly it is to obtain the drug, how each shipment represents both sacrifice and salvation. Because of that, it must be reserved for the gravest cases, yet its benefit extends far beyond any single patient. In truth, the Abbey's store serves the entire duchy, and Brother Thibault stands as the link between local suffering and the far reaches of worldly knowledge. Lucian feels a growing desire to learn more, not only about opium as a remedy for pain, but also its use in calming hysteria and agitation. He recalls how some physicians praise it as a great pacifier of the nervous spirit, a substance capable of quieting the imbalances of the humours that the medieval mind believed gave rise to madness. The idea fascinates him, that peace itself might be distilled, measured, and offered like a prayer in liquid form. As he returns to the cloister, the last light of the sun spills across the Abbey's stone walls, bathing them in a soft golden glow. The air is mild, touched with the scent of herbs and earth. Shadows stretch gently over the courtyard, and the balance of light and dark feels like a benediction, the world for a moment at rest. Lucian makes his way to his cell for the evening silence. A deep sense of belonging settles over him, to the Abbey, to its purpose, to the quiet charity that defines their days. He understands now that healing is not an act of haste, but of patience, that opium is merely a tool, a way to purchase time for the body to recover, or when that is no longer possible, to meet death with grace. As night descends over Saint-Félix-en-Plaine, the certainty takes hold within him. Whether through the exotic opium or the humble chamomile, the Abbey's work is the same, the work of mercy itself, the steady human labor of bringing peace to a world made restless by pain. In his castle at Astelia, Duke Emile sits in the dim hush of late afternoon, only hours after taking his daily dose of laudanum prepared by Brother Thibault. The pain has not vanished entirely. It has merely softened, reshaped itself into something gentler, almost reflective. Through the tall, arched window, he watches the first snow begin to fall, a rare and delicate spectacle for this time of year. The chill from the thick stone walls mingles with the warmth of the fire, a contrast that seeps into his very senses. Cold at his back, comfort at his face. He sits in an upholstered chair draped with fox fur, feeling the soft texture press against his body, the luxury both tactile and symbolic. His thoughts, once clouded by the aches in his leg and the burdens of rule, now drift in a tranquil rhythm, detached yet lucid. At his feet, his wife's small hunting dog lies curled and asleep, its slow breathing mirroring his own calm. The quiet crackle of the fire fills the room, each spark a gentle punctuation to the silence, a sound of peace rather than life. He recalls a story his father once told him, of a northern king who refused to touch opium, fearing it would dull his will and weaken his command in battle. Yet Emile sees now what his father's tale could not teach, that true weakness is not in seeking relief, but in letting pain rule the mind. To him, opium is not an escape, but a means of mastery, a servant to the intellect that allows him to remain himself. Reaching for the silver goblet beside him, he lifts it to his lips. The metal is cool, the taste faintly spiced with honey, its sweetness masking the bitterness of the tincture dissolved within. That familiar scent of wine and resin, mingled with the fire's warmth, has become the fragrance of privilege itself. Few men in his duchy, he knows, can afford such comfort. The dark, gleaming liquid feels symbolic, an elixir of control, a secret only the powerful can hold. His mind turns to Master Alain, his physician, whose reverent precision borders on devotion. Alain had once warned him of the dangers of dependence. But Emile smiles faintly at the thought. Pain, too, breeds dependence, perhaps the cruelest kind. Better to lean on relief than on agony, he muses, a quiet creed that justifies both the habit and the need. The laudanum is not a chain. It is a weapon sharpened against the dullness of suffering. The pale daylight filters through the stained glass, painting the stone floor in muted blues and reds. The effect is ethereal, almost sacred, as if the world itself were breathing through color. His memories of torment, once sharp, intrusive, now seem distant, like faint echoes in another man's mind. The poppy's spell has not erased his humanity. It has merely dimmed its noise, leaving behind the soft hum of being alive. He shifts his injured foot and feels not the stab of pain, but a mild, spreading warmth, a pleasant numbness that feels almost like grace. His body, once a prison of throbbing flesh, is now a vessel of quiet. It is, he realizes, the poppy's true gift, not oblivion, but balance. Outside, the snow falls thicker, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, the fire burns low. Emile closes his eyes, surrendering to the stillness that fills both room and soul. For a fleeting moment, the boundaries between body, mind, and world dissolve into one continuous calm, the serene mercy of the flower that blooms in darkness. The calm induced by the opium allows Duke Emile to return to his duties, freed at last from the constant distraction of pain. He unrolls a map of the duchy across his oak desk, the parchment thick beneath his hands, its smell of leather and aged wood rising like a memory. Those lands, once symbols of effort, taxation, and travel, now appear softened by a tranquil haze. The burden of command feels lighter, almost distant, filtered through the serene veil the laudanum grants him. His thoughts turn to the duchy's economy and to the opium routes Master Alain once described, a chain of trade stretching across mountain roads and southern ports, fragile as it was vital. The Duke realizes that his own comfort, his ability to govern without agony, depends on this same network of guarded paths and safe harbors. His private relief is tied to public order. His pain, in its absence, fuels the protection of commerce. In that awareness lies a truth of the Middle Ages. Health and politics are never far apart. He remembers a story whispered at court. A merchant caught smuggling impure opium, resin adulterated with pine sap. Desperate, the man had pleaded that it was meant for his dying wife. Before knowing Brother Thibault, Emile might have condemned him without hesitation. Now, under the softening influence of laudanum, he feels an unfamiliar empathy. Perhaps mercy, he muses, is another kind of strength, the one that pain too often smothers. The warmth of the fire seeps into his back, the temperature a perfect equilibrium between comfort and alertness. The gentle tap of snow against the leaded glass window replaces the echoes of battle that once haunted his dreams. The opium stills not only the ache of flesh, but the restlessness of memory. When he turns to a document on taxation, his thoughts flow cleanly, undisturbed. The decision that follows, a reduction in levies for the peasants, feels both rational and kind. For the first time in months, he acts without irritation, guided by clarity rather than fatigue. He understands, almost with surprise, that his own relief becomes a civic blessing. The well-being of the ruler trickles outward, shaping a gentler realm. At his feet, the dog stirs and stretches, licking his hand with a rough, warm tongue, a reminder of the tangible world. Pain feels remote, almost theoretical. Gratitude rises in him, and with it a thought. He will send Brother Thibault a gift, a small book of prayers bound in leather and gilt, as thanks for his devotion and skill. He recalls another tale from Alain. In older times, surgeons mixed opium with mandrake wine to dull agony before cutting flesh, though the risk of death from the mixture was great. Thibaud's tincture, measured and pure, is safer, proof that precision and mercy share the same discipline. The scent of the wine in his goblet drifts upward, mingling sweetness and bitterness. To Emile, it smells of power, of command over body and mind alike. In his thoughts, the old phrase returns, the milk of the poppy, the nectar of forgetting. He drinks not for oblivion, but for the space it grants him to think and act. Outside, snow thickens, blanketing the castle courtyard in silence. Within, the Duke sits motionless before the fire, his calm complete. He accepts now what once troubled him, that his reliance on the drug is the price of endurance. In the quiet harmony between necessity and peace, he feels no shame, only the faint, steady pulse of life continuing, ordered and serene. Night descends over the Abbey of Saint-Félix-en-Plaine. After a day of study and labor, Lucien lies down in his narrow cell, but his mind refuses rest. The stone floor beneath the thin straw mattress releases its coolness upward, and outside, the steady song of crickets fills the stillness. In that silence, every sound expands, each chirp a delicate pulse against the dark. His thoughts drift toward Brother Thibaud's cell, toward the earthen jar that holds the dark resin. He can almost smell it, the sweet, heavy fragrance of the opium, rich and physical, as though scent itself had weight. In memory, it becomes tangible, a perfume that presses softly against his senses. This imagined closeness is more than thought. It is a kind of reverent longing for the mystery of the substance. He recalls the story Thibaud once told him, of the monk who used opium to calm his restless spirit, easing tremors, softening the heartbeat, smoothing the tension that life etched into the face. The image returns vividly, the transformation of pain into stillness, of agitation into grace. To Lucien, the miracle is not in the sleep itself, but in the stilling of the invisible machinery of suffering. From one of Thibaud's old texts, he remembers a curious medieval remedy: ground poppy seeds, blended with goose fat and olive oil, spread across the temples and soles of the feet to summon rest. He imagines the texture, cool, oily, faintly fragrant, and how the body, through touch and faith alike, might surrender to its promise. The border between medicine and ritual feels blurred, both serving the same yearning for peace. The muffled bell of the monastery tolls once, marking midnight. Its tone hangs in the air, solemn and precise, a sound of discipline set against the chaos of human pain. Lucien clings to it, using the resonance as an anchor for his wandering thoughts, resisting the pull of sleep that, in his imagination, takes the form of the poppy's shadow. His mind wanders to contrasts: Duke Emile in his velvet-lined chamber, and Agnès, the market woman, on her bed of grain sacks. Both had been granted the same mercy by the same flower. In that realization, Lucien perceives a quiet truth, that the poppy is the great equalizer, its compassion blind to wealth, its peace distributed with divine impartiality. Turning on the straw, he feels the coarse scratch of it through his robe, a reminder of simplicity and endurance. Pain and discomfort, he was taught, are forms of penance, yet opium suspends that duty in the name of charity. To soothe pain, even one's own, may also be an act of devotion. A faint whiff of peat smoke drifts through the small window, mingling with the scent of straw and candle wax. Lucien breathes it in, aware of every layer of sensation, the cold air, the roughness beneath him, the rhythm of his heart settling into stillness. He realizes that true richness is not in the excess of comfort, but in the awareness of peace itself, the rare, sacred moment when nothing hurts, and the world, for once, asks nothing in return. Still in his cell, Brother Lucian tries to relax, but his mind refuses to surrender to sleep. He listens instead to the slow, steady breathing of the monks in the neighboring rooms, a rhythm of peace that rises and falls like a tide. That quiet sound reminds him of the faint murmurs of relief he'd heard from Sir Gautier and from Agnès, the market woman, just after the laudanum touched their lips. To Lucian, those sighs are the same as prayer. Small exhalations of gratitude whispered into the night. He remembers the strong scent of wine and spice that accompanied the tincture, an effort to make the bitter remedy bearable. The thought leads him to the complexity of its making. The poppy extract strengthened with cinnamon and clove, rare spices that travelled from the east and raised both its cost and prestige. Laudanum, he realizes, is as much a product of empire as of mercy. His thoughts return to Duke Emile, a small human story of privilege and suffering. He pictures the Duke resting in silk and linen, his leg wrapped in warmth while the poppy's calm spreads through him. The contrast is striking, a ruler wrapped in luxury, a monk wrapped in wool. Yet pain and its absence, Lucian reflects, are the only currencies that truly equalize men. From the library he recalls a curious fact. Between the 11th and 13th centuries, opium lay at the heart of countless remedies, pastes for toothaches, draughts for stomach pains, its effectiveness bridging the gulf of ignorance that surrounded most medieval medicine. The thought makes him smile faintly. Even in darkness, truth sometimes blooms. A cool breath of damp night air touches his face, and he pulls his coarse wool blanket close. In his mind, he sees again the painted poppy from the old manuscript, its red petals luminous against parchment. Delicacy and danger joined in one fragile stem. He rises for a moment, pacing across the cell, feeling the chill of the stone under his bare feet. Somewhere beyond the cloister, Brother Thibaut will soon begin his vigil, guarding the abbey's supply of resin. Lucian thinks of him as the keeper of sleep for an entire duchy, the quiet sentinel of every peaceful dream. The novice ponders the narrow line between medicine and dependence, a thought that stirs him uneasily. He understands that what divides healing from ruin is not the substance, but the intention, and that Thibaut's vow of charity keeps that line clear. The poppy, wielded with mercy, serves life. Without it, it consumes it. Lying down once more, Lucian feels his mind finally begin to quiet. The chirping of the crickets softens, the scent of straw thickens in the still air, and a mild warmth settles over his body. In that gentleness, he senses the truth he has been circling all along. The poppy gives life through rest, yet can steal it through excess. It is both blessing and peril, an earthly mystery he has only begun to revere. The Duchy of Astilia moves beneath a heavy stillness, its mood shaped by weather and by spirit alike. What had begun the night before as a quiet dusting of snow has deepened by morning into a steady fall, muting sound and colour. At the Abbey of Saint-Félix-en-Plaine, the light that filters through the narrow windows is greyish-blue, soft and contemplative. The air is dry and cold, but in Brother Thibaut's small cell, a brazier burns steadily in the corner, its faint heat creating a fragile island of warmth. He watches the fine snow collecting on the outer ledge of the window, the shifting brightness turning the stone room almost ethereal. The slow change of light invites reflection. He thinks about how fragile life becomes in such winters, and how opium in these months is not only a balm for pain, but a defense against coughs, fevers, and the creeping exhaustion that cold and dampness bring. The tincture, he realizes, is not merely a healer's tool, it is a guardian of survival itself. With quiet care, Thibaut takes a small squirrel hairbrush and sweeps the dust from his bronze scales. The act is deliberate, almost reverent. He feels the softness of the bristles, the faint metallic scent of the weights, and in those sensations lies the calm precision that governs his craft. Each motion reminds him of the discipline his work demands, patience, restraint, and respect for what he holds in his hands. His thoughts wander back to a winter long past, a peasant woman who had come to him, carrying her husband in the final stages of pneumonia. The dying man's last request had been for the sleep of peace, that he might meet death without the agony of suffocation. Thibaut granted the wish. The memory of the man's face, transformed from torment to serenity, was what had first taught him the solemn weight of mercy. He recalls, too, an old Byzantine manuscript that described the opium being pressed into tablets for ease of storage and transport. The idea lingers in his mind. Perhaps he could refine the resin in similar form, preserving its strength through the harsh months ahead. Lifting the earthen jar, he inhales deeply. The sweet, heavy aroma fills the cell, familiar yet always potent, a scent of contradiction. In it lives both tension and release, both suffering and stillness. Opium, he muses, is the very emblem of duality, the poison that heals, the darkness that soothes. Outside, the wind moans softly along the abbey walls. Inside, all remains ordered and serene. Thibaut recognizes that his own calm is as vital as the purity of his tincture. His peace must guide the steadiness of his hand. He turns once more to the window. Beyond the falling snow lies a world of frailty, dependent on the precision of his small measures. Winter is the season of greatest need, and the monk knows that his duty now is not only to prepare, but to ration, to give wisely, justly, and only where mercy demands. Brother Lucian is sent to the infirmary to tend to Brother Anselm, the elderly monk whose joints have long been prisoners of pain. As Lucian walks through the abbey's corridors, the chill of the stone floor seeps through his sandals. But in the infirmary, the air is warmer, a fire burns steadily in the hearth, casting a gentle heat meant to cradle the frail. Outside, snow continues its soft descent, its muffled rhythm deepening the silence within, turning the room into a sanctuary of stillness. Approaching the bedside, Lucian breathes in the mingled scents of boiled linen and rosemary, the herb Anselm uses to soothe his aching limbs. The old monk lies pale and stiff beneath the woolen blankets, yet when his eyes meet the novice's, a faint smile surfaces. Following Brother Thibaut's instructions, Lucian pours a measured dose of laudanum into a cup of warm wine, a small act of mercy that has become part of the abbey's daily ritual. Anselm drinks slowly. The liquid is thick and dark, its warmth spreading first through his throat, then radiating outward. He feels the change begin, not a sudden release but a slow unwinding, as though invisible cords were being loosened one by one. The coarse weight of pain gives way to a soft heaviness, his body sinking gently into the mattress, the wool blanket resting like a benediction on his shoulders. Lucian watches the transformation unfold. The lines on Anselm's face ease, the tension drains from his hands, and a quiet peace settles over him. He recalls what Thibaut once told him, that in the later centuries of the Middle Ages, opiates were prescribed not only for pain, but for melancholy, believed to quiet both flesh and spirit. In that moment, Lucian understands the truth of it. The poppy grants not only silence to the body, but forgiveness to the soul. The infirmary grows still. Only Anselm's slow, rhythmic breathing breaks the hush, each breath lighter than the one before. Lucian feels a deep tenderness, a realization that the opium is more than medicine. It is a form of divine mercy, allowing an old man to meet the twilight of his life with dignity rather than torment. He steps toward the window, where the courtyard lies beneath a deepening layer of snow. The world outside has turned white, and the purity of it mirrors the peace within the room. The contrast between the pale snow and the dark stone walls feels symbolic, the serenity of oblivion resting gently upon the harshness of existence. Lucien's mind drifts to a story he heard from Duke Emile. During an old battle, the Duke once knelt beside a dying soldier who begged for death to escape unbearable pain. Emile, lacking opium then, could only pray. That memory, Lucien realizes, explains the Duke's reverence for Thibault's tincture. In a world of agony, mercy had to be distilled. He leaves the infirmary carefully, unwilling to disturb the peace he has witnessed. His footsteps sound soft and muted against the cold stone floor, merging with the faint whisper of the falling snow outside. The abbey, wrapped in winter's silence, feels like the heart of a sleeping world. Back in his cell, Lucien breathes in the lingering scent of burning wood drifting through the corridor, an invitation to contemplation. He thinks of Brother Thibault, the quiet custodian of the poppy, whose steady hands bring the same relief to duke and monk alike. As the day fades, Lucien rests with the quiet certainty that even in its danger, opium remains the abbey's purest act of charity, a fragile but enduring symbol of hope in an age built upon suffering. As the morning snow subsides, the sky remains thick with grey clouds, and daylight fades into a muted glow that softens the great halls of Saint-Félix-en-Plaine. In the library, Brother Lucien sits beside Brother Thibault at a long oak table, the air heavy with the scent of dust, ink, and parchment. The quiet scratch of Thibault's quill against the margin of an ancient medical text is the only sound, steady, deliberate, like the rhythm of thought itself. In a low, measured voice, Thibault begins to pass on what he calls his final lessons on the poppy. He speaks of its eastern origins, of how the resin travelled across deserts and seas, passing through the hands of Arab physicians, Venetian traders, and Byzantine healers before reaching the abbey's modest stores. The route, he explains, was long, perilous, and costly, making opium a privilege reserved for nobles and for mercy. What we hold here, he says softly, is both luxury and salvation. He pauses to underline a line in the manuscript, then continues, "The true miracle of opium lies not in its strength, but in precision. A single grain," he says, "separates the sleep of healing from the sleep of death." His tone is calm, but the weight of his words fills the cold air. As they catalogue the texts, Thibault recounts an old practice from the Eastern Roman Empire, how wounded soldiers were given opium after battle, not merely to dull pain but to quell shock and restore breath. "It saved more lives through rest," he murmurs, "than the sword ever could through valor." The story, like the resin itself, carries both comfort and gravity. Lucien runs his fingers along the rough surface of the parchment, the faint odour of mould and old ink rising around him. He thinks of Père Renaud, the dying farmer who now drifts in his final sleep, guided by Thibault's tincture, a humble example of how compassion endures even at the edge of mortality. Thibault turns a page in the manuscript and points to an illustration, a delicate poppy, its petals inked in soft red, its seed pod rendered in dark brown. "There," he says, "is our paradox, beauty and danger in one stem." The contrast between the flower's fragility and the violent potency of its resin lingers in Lucien's mind. "Remember this," Thibault adds, his voice low, "when you hold it in your hands. Never forget that life itself is as delicate as that blossom." The older monk rises and walks slowly across the stone floor, his steps echoing in the vast silence. "Pain," he says, "is the language of the body, and to understand it is the beginning of all healing. The poppy only lends us the means to quiet its voice." He glances toward the small window, where the dim light struggles through the clouds. The Duke sleeps, he continues, and through his rest, the duchy rests. Remember that the peace of Astilia depends as much on mercy as on governance. The faint sweetness of the resin seems to follow him even here, as though the very air of the abbey has absorbed its calm. Then, with a quiet certainty, Thibaut reaches into his robe and produces a small bronze key. He holds it for a moment in his palm, before offering it to Lucian. "This," he says, "opens the cabinet where the pure resin is kept. Guard it as you would a soul, neither with fear nor pride, but with reverence." Lucian takes it, feeling the smooth, cool metal against his skin. It is light in weight, yet heavy with meaning. In that moment, the novice understands that the key is more than an object. It is the passing of trust, of duty, of an ancient and perilous mercy that binds the living to the dying. With the bronze key in his hand, Brother Lucian feels the true weight of what has been entrusted to him. He and Brother Thibaut leave the library together, stepping into the courtyard where the fading light turns the abbey into a world of quiet solemnity. Their footsteps press softly into the packed snow, the muted sound echoing like a vow, an unspoken promise of duty accepted. As they walk, Thibaut speaks in his calm, reflective tone. He recalls the incurable pain of Agnès, the market woman, and the fleeting relief of Duke Emile, and how opium alone bridges the distance between the two. "Mercy," he says, "is measured by the depth of suffering, not by station or wealth. And in our hands, mercy must always find the most desperate first." He tells Lucian of a band of pilgrims once robbed in the forest, their gold and food taken, yet a small vial of laudanum left behind. The thieves had dismissed it as spoiled wine. "The ignorance of men," Thibaut remarks, "is what guards the truest treasures." The story lingers, a quiet reminder that the worth of compassion often hides beneath humble forms. Lucian turns the key over in his palm, feeling its cool, polished surface. It is small, yet carries the weight of a lifetime's work. The sweet, dense fragrance of the resin seems to rise in his memory, mingling with the cold air around them, a scent both sacred and dangerous. In that moment, he understands that his task is not simply to preserve a substance, but to safeguard the boundary between pain and peace. Thibaut speaks again, his voice softened by fatigue and wisdom. "When pain is lifted, the soul can turn back to prayer. That is the true purpose of the poppy, to clear the path between the spirit and its maker." Père Renaud's peace was not the gift of sleep, but of clarity in his final breath. They stop by the old well in the courtyard. The still water reflects the dim sky, a pale mirror of calm. Thibaut gazes into it and smiles faintly. "See how the surface rests, undisturbed. That is the peace we give to others, and in time, the peace we must accept for ourselves." His words carry the quiet awareness of his own approaching rest. Before they resume walking, Thibaut adds one last thread of ancient knowledge. "The Egyptians," he says, "kept their opium in alabaster vessels, sealed from heat and light. They knew that preservation was as sacred as creation." Lucian listens carefully, storing away the image, a lineage of caretakers stretching back through the centuries. When Lucian asks about addiction, Thibaut answers with his usual serenity. "That is why restraint is our discipline. The medicine must never become an escape. We give it to bring the body back to grace, not to chain it in forgetfulness." He smiles gently, his expression full of peace. "The greatest comfort," he says, "is not what the opium gives, but what the heart feels when it has done all it can to ease another's pain. That, my son, is the true end of our work." Together, they walk toward the church for Compline, the final prayer of the day. The bells toll slowly, their rhythm merging with the sound of their steps across the snow. The air grows colder, urging retreat into warmth and rest. Their conversation fades into silence, but its meaning endures. The abbey, with its quiet monks and its dark clay jar, will remain the beating heart of mercy within the Duchy of Astilia, a small, steadfast beacon of compassion amid the harshness of the medieval world. Duke Emile has fallen asleep once more in his castle. The market woman Agnès has found another brief truce in her pain, and old Père Renaud has finally departed in peace, his body released from agony by the abbey's final balm. Alone in his cell, Brother Lucien gazes into the darkness beyond his window, and a quiet sense of completion settles over the Duchy of Astilia. The silence is deep and absolute, broken only by the gentle murmur of wind outside, a poetic echo of the rest that opium has granted them all. In his mind, the images return without names or time. The chill of a winter night, the sweet, resinous fragrance in Thibault's cell, the steady rhythm of the mortar and pestle. Every sense ties him again to the secret of the poppy. He feels the cool, smooth surface of the bronze key resting in his palm, the weight of a new responsibility, and understands that Thibault's true legacy is not the tincture itself, but the knowledge of mercy, the art of easing suffering in a world steeped in it. Lucien reflects on the frailty of life and the quiet power of human compassion to soften its harsh edges. The thought brings him calm. He realizes that the greatness of the extract lies not in its rarity or its cost, but in its ability to grant reprieve, to give the body and the soul a dignified pause, a moment to gather strength for another day or to accept the end without fear. He remembers the merchant Pietro, who traded gold for prayers, and understands that the search for relief is a bond that transcends wealth and creed. The scent of the poppy, now just a trace in memory, becomes a symbol of shared humanity, a fragrance that drifts from palace to market stall, joining noble and peasant alike in their longing for peace. Rising from his bed, Lucien paces slowly across the room. His quiet movements mirror the serenity he has witnessed in others. The opium, the drug of kings and the dying, has completed its circle, granting rest to the duke, calm to the wounded knight, and a gentle passing to the old farmer. In this rhythm, he senses a divine symmetry, as though pain itself has found its balance in mercy. He thinks of the contrast between the stillness of the abbey and the restless life of Verneuil's market. The poppy's power lies between those two worlds, between silence and noise, despair and endurance, bridging them with its fragile grace. The nectar of forgetfulness, as the ancients once called it, is the night's final benediction over Astilia, a balm that flows invisibly through its fields, its villages, and its hearts. Lucien lies down once more. The chill of the stone floor beneath him no longer matters. The warmth of peace has settled within. It is not healing he feels, but acceptance, a serene understanding of the human condition and the certainty that the abbey will endure as the quiet guardian of relief through the secret of the poppy. The muffled rhythm of his own heartbeat becomes the last sound he hears before sleep overtakes him, drawing him into the same deep rest that now covers all of Astilia, a sleep born from knowledge, from compassion, and from the enduring mercy of Brother Thibault. Brother Lucien closes his eyes, and the darkness of his cell becomes a protective veil, an extension of the stillness the poppy has cast over Astilia. He recalls the mists and chill of the 8th century duchy, contrasting them with the quiet warmth that peace brings, a warmth deeper and longer lasting than any hearth fire. The thought fills him with gratitude for the simple, enduring power of relief. He imagines sleep as a calm river into which all suffering flows and dissolves, and the opium as the current that guides each vessel toward that resting shore. Duke Emile drifts upon its waters as Père Renaud has reached his final harbour. Castle and cottage now joined in the same courtesy of forgetting. Each memory comes gently, the careful weight of the pestle, the glint of the bronze key, the coarse texture of parchment, the sweet heaviness of the resin's scent. Every detail of Thibault's craft is now a quiet inheritance, a discipline of mercy that Lucien must carry forward, a message of peace in a world where pain is constant and unavoidable. The silence deepens around him, and the soft rhythm of his own breathing becomes the last thread tying him to wakefulness. The calm that settles over him is not triumph, but acceptance, the certainty that no matter how powerful pain may be, there will always exist a force in knowledge and nature strong enough to ease it. He understands at last that the beauty of the poppy lies not in its exotic bloom, but in its power to interrupt, the brief pause in the endless chain of suffering that allows hope to take root again. That realization becomes his final metaphor, the truth of his calling. The faint light seeping through the window fades to nothing, and the darkness itself becomes an invitation to rest. His final vigil is the acceptance that the poppy's secret is not magic, but precision, and above all, intention wrapped in charity. In the stillness beyond his walls, Duke Emile dreams of green fields free of pain. Agnès passes the night without the hammering in her head. Père Renaud rests in the silence granted to him. The opium, the drug of peace, has kept its promise to all. Until tomorrow, traveller, I'll be waiting to journey again with you through these forgotten ages. You already know where to find me, here, between history and dream. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and sleep well, traveller.